Hi guys, welcome to another video. In this video, we'll be looking into the spacer widget of Flutter. So we'll be looking into what spacer widget is exactly and how do you use it in your app or in your project. So let the emulator get started. So by then you can go ahead and create a new Android Studio project and you can get rid of these comments which come in with a new project. And also you can get rid of pretty much everything which is there inside this home page state. So you can also probably get rid of this increment counter because it's of no use to us. Now once you do have a clean slate just like me, you can probably, like, if you want, you can keep the scaffold so that you can continue on that. And yeah, so we'll just give it a run and see how does it look like. Like, at least like everything is connected. Yeah, emulator is running fine. So I'll just give it a run. So if you guys have used the expanded widget, so Spacer is pretty much similar to that, except that like expanded widget literally expands the widget which it is the parent of. So when you're using an expanded widget in a row or column, what expanded widget does is that it tries to flex that widget which it is parent of as much as it can, or I mean the flex, depending upon the flex attribute which you provide to it. Whereas the spacer widget, on the other hand, it doesn't have any widget wraps. I mean, technically it does, but it's more of like a free space which has been flexed over in a row. So it is to put it simply, it's more like creating space between the widgets in a row or column. So that is what it is like in very simple terms. But don't worry, when we look into an example, it will get more clear. And by then what I'll do is I'll simply start putting in some code. Actually, the build's running, that's why it got a bit slow. So even if you look into the actual, um, like the if you deep dive into the spacer widget, you look into it, it's nothing but an expanded widget, except that its child is simply a size box, and the flex property by default is set to 1. So that's what it is. It's essentially an expanded widget, uh, and it simply tries to create space between the widgets which are besides it, or between which it is placed. So that's what spacer widget is. Okay, so app's now running, and so yeah, let's just add in some widgets to see what spacer exactly does. Let's simply put in a container. Okay, container, and you have like a height, let's say, of 100, width, let's just keep it, and let's give it a color so that we can identify what it is exactly. And just like this container, we'll add another container just below it. And yeah, so right now when you're going to run the app, it's just going to be like two containers between, just one after the other, and you can't even distinguish uh, them, like whether it's a single container, or there are two containers one below the other. So let's give in some um, margin. So okay, so now we can see that there are two containers out there, but what we're trying to see here is that how does spacer come into picture. So let's say if I put in a spacer widget here. So as I said before, it simply tries to flex between its adjacent widgets, so thereby creating space between the two. So if I hot reload this and you see the result, you see that the two containers are now stretched apart, and there's quite some distance between them. But you could make an argument that what is it that's so special about a spacer? I mean, you could achieve the same result simply by now it's restored to the previous state. You could do the same thing by maybe doing main axis alignment, and main axis alignment dot uh, space between. Now when you run this thing, you see it's the same thing, right? So when exactly does spacer come into picture? Now this was just a simple example of what spacer was like, but you could do more with it. Like you could control the space distribution between widgets. So for example, you could add another spacer widget here, and if you have another spacer widget here, and if you hot reload, you see that there are now there's some bit of space which is added just below the other container, and yeah, so there are actually two those two containers now have spaces between them, like the space between the first container and then there's space between the other container. Now that's equal distribution of space. If I do adjust the space over here, like if I put in some flex, and now flex is this property by means of which you can control the distribution of space. So by default it is 1. If I make it as 2, what happens here is that you see that the space over here just increased by some distance, by some distance. So what's happened here is that the space is now distributed in the ratio of 2:1. Okay, and if you do it like maybe if you put in flex over here as 3, so it will be distributed in the ratio of 2:3 or 3:2, depending upon which way you look at it. So you see, like, you can control the uh, ratio in which the space can be distributed in your app. So if I make it 8, you see it pushes it up even more, and if you make it 2 over here and make it 8 over here, so it's gonna do it the other way around. You could also use the same thing. You can also use the same thing in a row widget. Okay, so it works simply the same because the underlying widget is an expanded at the end of the day. So you could pretty much do the same thing with a row widget though. Maybe just remove this. Yeah, so you see now that there are these two widgets, and you could probably contain the height, but let's just keep it there. And so you can again do the same thing, like you could put in a flex of 1 and 1, which is the by default thing. So you'll see that there'll be equal space distribution, but then you can again play around with the space. You could make it 3 for the first one, and you see the space is now being space between these two widgets is more compared to the other one, because the ratio you provided is 3, and for the other one you provided as 1. So that's the reason the widgets got the space got distributed between those widgets in that manner. So it's basically that. So to put it in a single line, spacer widget will simply help you control the space between the widgets, and that's all about it. We might take in a more complex example in some other video, in like a proper UI tutorial, where I'll explain more about how you can use it in your app. But for now, this was all about that was all from this video. So thank you guys. Be sure to subscribe and like the video. Thank you.